Hey, good morning. My name is Julius McDonald. I've been a student here at Luther Rice now for about 2 semesters, and I'm here to give you this project, giving you information about my mentor, the one who's made the biggest difference in my life. His name is Julius McDonald. It's going to be real weird because it happens to be my name. That is correct. He is my father. And it just so happens that he is the biggest mentor in my entire life. Born in 1952 in a little old bitty town called Lancaster, South Carolina, he was given birth by a midwife. Now, I don't know if any of you actually know what a midwife is because I actually had to look it up myself. But, back in the day, they didn't have a lot of nurses and doctors and access to medical supplies and people. So they used midwives, which is women who just come out to the house just when you're in labor to give birth. And that's how we came into this world. 1952. All throughout his life, he's been teaching, preaching, ministering. He taught music. He was a church pastor, a biblical scholar. He used to give a lot of his time that he wouldn't spend it with us, with me, my sister, and my mom. He would give a lot of that time to elderly, prison, church, youth minister. He did so many things. I could write a bibliography just on that alone, but that's not why we're here. We're here because we are going to be discussing what he meant to me as a mentor. As a mentor to me, I remember this day. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was the day that I accepted Christ into my life. He was preaching a sermon. The sermon, I remember the subject actually. I was like 14 years old. I remember the subject. He said, everything that shines ain't gold. You know how they do with them Baptist ministers. They always like to repeat what they say after they say it to make sure that you understand what the subject is. He's like, everything that shines ain't gold. And then he works his way through this sermon. I'm talking tears everywhere, people getting saved. But I remember at the end of that sermon, he sung this song. It was by Elvis Presley. It said, "He touched me." Tears rolling out of my face as he sung it. And every time he'd sing a verse, he said, "Will you come? Will you come?" He's calling people to the altar to get saved. And that was the day that I gave my life to Jesus at that tender young age of 14. All throughout his life, all throughout my life, he's been mentoring me. It's very difficult being raised in a household when your dad is the church pastor and he's got books upon books upon books stacked where he reads constantly, and it's very intimidating to me. But I remember times he'd come into my room, kick my bed like, "Hey, did you memorize that scripture yet?" Because back in those times, kids used to have to get in front of churches and they used to have to quote scripture. And it was very embarrassing, so much pressure. But my dad would be sitting right up there in the pulpit looking down on me, expecting me to do better than everyone else because I'm his son. But I didn't mind because he'd been grilling me all the way up until that point. Make sure you remember this, make sure you remember that. And he'd make sure that I would quote it over and over and over again to him, in front of my mom, in front of my sister. That was just it was very difficult, but it did shape me, mold me into the man that I am today, because I don't think there would be any way in the world I would possibly have made it if it were not for him. Even in my older years, I was running into difficult times, and he used to always have this saying. It was just one time that I felt unemployed. My family was struggling, and I had this really small job. It was only making like $8 an hour, and I had a wife, I had 2 kids, and he just looks at me like, "Son, as long as you have a job, as long as you have an income, you have a fighting chance." And he would say that to me, and I never quite understood. I'm like, what kind of a fighting chance am I going to have making $8 an hour raising a family? But it did not matter. As long as there's something coming, you always have a fighting chance. And he would drive those messages home to me, and that was just one of many. Even in my older years, as I came to married now with older kids, anytime I needed advice, I could always call him. He would always guide me. And even as I started my ministry, even as I started to teach and preach on my own, I would call him up like, Dad, what do you think of this and what do you think of that? And he'd tell me, you need to throw that stuff away because it doesn't really matter. He had this philosophy that when it comes to biblical studies, the details didn't matter as much as the stories. He wanted everyone to make sure that they knew the stories, because if you knew the stories, it doesn't matter what scripture is thrown at you. It doesn't matter what you're talking about. Whenever they give you a scripture, you should be in your brain, since you know the stories, you should be able to pick it out. So, for example, if someone was quoting a scripture about praise and worship, immediately my brain would think, that sounds like David's words. Or if someone's talking about law or the specifics of it and don't depart from it, I immediately think Moses or Joshua. Stuff like that. You'd make sure that each one of the major stories throughout the Bible, you knew them. So that way, the specifics didn't matter as much as you knew the person, you knew the event, you knew what happened during that time. It's stuff like that that made him an exceptional youth minister. He used to teach and preach to kids, including me. And that was his concept. He wouldn't just preach the verses or the specifics and the dates and times. He wanted to make sure that you knew the stories. Unfortunately, here recently, over the last year, January of 2020, the sun set on my father's time here. I had to let him go, and they asked me to speak at his funeral. And there were just so many. I mean, most of the time, whenever I'm giving this man's resume, people look at me like, I could not believe he did this, this, and this. But that's like a very small part of what it is that he was. That's just the part that you saw. I have to give the personal account. All of those late nights where he stayed up with me, all of those days where he was pushing me to be better, stronger, faster. It never stopped. It never ended, even to this day. The day that he left, I remember talking to him. He'd always give me a hug, say, I love you, son, but make sure you do this. Make sure you do that. Make sure you do that. He was teaching, preaching, and mentoring me all the way up to the very end. That is the man. That is the mentor. That is what my subject is on today. Thank you for your time, and you have a good rest of your day.